Okay.
Welcome to this Sharing Jesus workshop. Really good to see you. We've got Irene and Ruth and Sheila. My name's Simon Goddard. I am a lead on resourcing for Fresh Expressions, and joined by Mike Moyner. Do you want to introduce yourself, Mike?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm a consultant to Fresh Expressions. I've been involved with new forms of church for, 20 years or more, writing about them, being an advocate for them, being a consultant for them. And for my sins, I'm also author of the material on the Sharing Jesus website. I didn't do any of the design, I have to say, but I did write some of the content. So you now know who to blame.
It's great. More people are joining us as we begin. So I'll just wait for people to come into our Zoom room here on the as we prepare. There's a couple more. Let me just make sure everybody's in before we can carry on. As you're coming in, you'll see, if you can see all of the people in the Zoom meeting, you'll notice Mark Robinson. He's our comms guy, recently appointed communications member of our Fresh Expressions team, and he's just familiarizing himself with this workshop and with the Sharing Jesus resource. So he's sort of sitting in the background, keeping an eye on things today, just to help him familiarize himself with this resource. And we're really pleased that you're able to join us as we think about this Sharing Jesus resource. So we're going to introduce you to the resource. I don't know, I sent an email out yesterday. People are still joining us, which is great. Really good to see you all. I sent an email out yesterday with a link to the resource at Sharing Jesus. So it'd be really good if you just want to type in the chat room whether you are someone who has accessed the resource before, or whether this is the first time that you're hearing about the resource. That'd be really helpful to know. And maybe type, while you're typing that in, introduce yourself as well. Tell us where you're watching from, where you're based. So where you're based and whether you've accessed the resource already, or whether this is your first, as it were, introduction to it. So I can see some of you typing, which is great. In a moment, I'm going to show you the animations from the resource. There's seven separate elements to the Sharing Jesus resource, each with an animation and a downloadable PDF guide and a selfie video of someone talking about using the resource. But we're just going to show you the animations at this point. So it's great. So Southsea near Portsmouth, Wetherby. Yeah, I had a quick look. It looks great. Some people haven't accessed the resource yet. So yeah, that's fine. We'll introduce you to it. Based in Suffolk, Shropshire. I'm off to Shropshire this weekend, which will be great. Derbyshire. Okay, looks like a lot of you, this will be, maybe you've had a quick look, but it's not something you're very familiar with. So that's, in some ways, that's great that we're in a similar place. So let me, Mike, as I gear up to show this, do you want to just do a little bit of an introduction to the resource, and then we'll play. It's about 10 minutes, these animations all together. So sit back and watch the animations. It will give you like an overview. But yeah, Mike, if you sort of introduce
So hello again, everyone. I introduced myself earlier, but then a whole lot more of you joined. So again, just to say very quickly, I'm a consultant to Fresh Expressions. I've been involved with Fresh Expressions, writing about them, advocating for them, being a consultant and coach and so on for the last 20 years or so. As I said, for my sins, I'm the author of the content on the Sharing Jesus website. but not responsible for the wonderful design and so on, which others have done. So basically, on the website, you'll see that there are 7 different topics. You'll get a flavour for those topics as Simon plays the animations for each topic. So the topics are starting, discussing, discovering, questioning, disagreeing, deepening, and enriching. For each topic, the structure is the same. There's a 1.5 minute animation. There's then a written guide, and then there's a video, a 2 or 3 minute video where someone describes having used the resource. And I always say this, if you go to a particular topic that's interesting to you, I'd really encourage you not only to watch the animation, but to read the guide. So for example, in the discovering section, the animation will describe one very simple way of doing exploratory Bible study with people who are not Christians. But if you go onto the resource, you'll find 4 other possible approaches. And as you watch the animation, you may say to yourself, actually, that's great, but it wouldn't work with the people I'm in touch with, or it wouldn't work for me personally. But you can go into the guide, and the guide only takes a few minutes to read, and you'd find 3 or 4 other different alternative approaches. So I just want to say that the written guides are not entirely duplicative of the animations. And then if you want a story of someone who's actually done it, you can watch the videos as well.
Great. So we're all geared up to watch. I'll just let a couple of extra people in. So just as you join us, we're just going to show a 10-minute compilation of all the animations from the Sharing Jesus resource, and then we'll come back and I'll tell you what's coming up next after we've done that. So let me play this for you.
Maybe you're involved in an outreach project with people who don't go to church, a bereavement support group, for example, or a group that meets for lunch. It's dead easy to add a spiritual dimension and introduce them to a fuller life. All are made to feel welcome whether they choose to take part in this or not, so here's an example of what you can do. Invite those who wish to stay on after the meeting. Gather round 1 or 2 tables. Light some candles. Play some Christian music. Read a story from the Bible or an extract from a collection of Christian spiritual writings. Allow time for silent prayer or reflection. Read a couple of prayers or make up your own. Just 15 minutes max. You could do something like this with almost any outreach initiative. A craft group, a lunch for people who are homeless, a youth group, a community cafe, and more. So why not enhance what you already offer? Why not give people a chance to explore a richer life? No one is compelled to join in, but for those who do, they'll be nourished in their spiritual growth.
Want to share the Christian faith, but talking about Jesus would be a step too far? Try Conversations with a Difference. Choose a topic that interests the group, a news item, a celebrity, well-being, a soap opera, your pets, sport, a music genre, anything the group would like to discuss. Talk about it for a while. Then ask the question that turns it into a different kind of conversation. If God exists, what would God think? Or if you prefer, imagine a great spiritual teacher dropped in. What would they say? Imagine a walking group. When you stop for a drink or a meal, start a conversation with a difference. Invite someone to suggest a topic. After a while, ask the question that makes the conversation different. If God exists, or if a great spiritual teacher dropped in, what would they say? You could do this with young people at your messy church activity table, with your neighbours, with any group. Want this to feel natural? See the written resource for ideas. People would become more confident in talking about spirituality. They would connect spirituality to life and they would have fun.
Looking for an easy way to share the Christian faith? Invite people to a spirituality group. You might explain, Jesus is known as one of the world's greatest spiritual teachers. Let's look at some of the stories about him and see what we think. For each story, use Bible Talk. Ask 4 questions. If this story happened today, what would it look like? What is it saying to me? Could it make a difference to my life? If so, how? Did it make a difference? If so, how? You could look at the first 3 questions in one session, or you could do them over 3 sessions to keep each session short. Then do an experiment. See if the story does make a difference to people's lives. The key word is experiment. Some experiments bear fruit, others don't. That's life. So don't let people worry about whether the experiment works or not. In the next session, share your experiences. Christians involved can relax, because the Bible does the evangelism. All they have to do is join in. No embarrassment, just authentic conversation. Anyone can take part.
Worried that when using Bible Talk, people will ask you a question and you won't know the answer? Or that they'll think your answer is stupid? Solution: there's no need to answer their questions. If they ask a factual question like, who was John the Baptist? Invite them to Google the answer. If it's a question of opinion, like, what about all the suffering in the world? Ask, from what you know about Jesus so far, what do you think he would say? And join in the discussion yourself. Don't worry about people getting the wrong answer, and don't think you need to correct what they say. You may end up discouraging them. If our place in heaven depended on right answers, none of us would get there. We are saved by grace, not by right answers. Just affirm whatever you can in their response. Overlook what you disagree with, and focus on what's most important, connecting them with Jesus. So don't worry about controversial questions. Simply reply, from what you know about Jesus so far, what do you think he would say? You'll be promoting the best spiritual habit of all, relating life to Christ.
When you explore the Christian faith with inquirers who don't go to church, some people are bound to disagree with you and with each other. Don't worry. Disagreement is part of the Christian life. Indeed, the church's 2,000 years of argument. Here's what you might do. Imagine someone in the group says something provocative. Suggest people prayerfully or thoughtfully consider their responses and then share what comes to them. Make it easy to remain silent if someone prefers to listen. Encourage people not to correct, but listen to each other. Remind them that the church is full of different views, and this variety can offer a broader glimpse of God. Suggest that after people have shared their reactions, the group has another brief silence. Then take it in turns for people, if they wish, to say where they have seen godly love in others' responses. Someone's smile, an encouraging expression on a person's face, someone leaning forward to listen, what someone else said. Then let the discussion move on. People will have spoken honestly, everyone will have been heard, no one will have been judged, World War III won't have broken out, and you'll have shown a Christian way to handle disagreement. In the middle of conflict, people will have listened to God.
What might you do after you've introduced people to Jesus? Say you have used Bible Talk as described in Discovering. How might you help inquirers go deeper? Here's a possibility. Before the group meets, point one or two people to content you've prayerfully considered, such as a blog, podcast or video that explains the Bible story, gives some background information or suggests how the story applies today. The investigators share what they've learnt before the discussion starts. The group is now accessing wisdom from the church at large. Members rely on the Spirit to work through the Bible, the group as it discusses the Bible passage, experience as people describe their experiences of applying the story, and the wider body as members of the group access Christian resources on the web. One more thing, don't forget to pass around the leadership. When people help to lead, it becomes their group. Sharing leadership generates commitment. Even young children can lead a Bible discussion. An example of this and other great ideas are found elsewhere in this Sharing Jesus resource.
How do you turn an inquirers group into a worshipping community? Well, if you use Bible Talk or something similar, you're halfway there. At the beginning or the end of the discussion, why not light a candle? Perhaps play appropriate music or allow 2 or 3 minutes of silent headspace. Encourage people to think positive thoughts for a loved one or a situation in the news, or to reflect on one thing from the Bible discussion. Then invite them to address their thoughts to God as they currently understand the divine. Or else suggest people write a prayer or bring one and read it out. Look for creative gifts and passions within the group. Might someone bring an object to spark a prayer? Might others offer a poem they've selected or written? Might some of the group take photographs to illustrate a theme? Might some be inspired to write tweets or emails as a way of turning their prayers into action? Why not encourage takeaways, asking people to write a social media post or draw a picture expressing what they think God was saying during the gathering? Bit by bit, Bible discussion would expand into richer worship.
That's great. So you saw there the 7 animations, one after the other, that are at the heart of the resource. What we're going to do now is put you into breakout groups just for about 7 or 8 minutes, and going to ask you some questions. So just bear with me a second while I create those rooms. Bear with me a second. So just gonna right. So it's 3 people in each room. So what I'm going to ask you to do as you go into those rooms for 7 minutes or so is, so what was your reaction to the animations, to the suggestions in the animations? What are your experiences of evangelism? Have you been involved in evangelism in your church, and what have you used? And particularly showing Jesus as a resource for group-based evangelism rather than one-to-one evangelism, which there are other resources out there for. So what have you been your experiences in terms of evangelism in a group context? What was helpful? What was a challenge? Mike, before we go into those groups, do you want to suggest anything else that they might be thinking about, or anything you want to say before we go into those groups?
No, that's great, Simon. Again, just to underline, there are lots of resources about one-to-one evangelism, but we're imagining a situation where you've got a group of people together. Perhaps they're in a craft group, or perhaps it's a bereavement group, or perhaps it's a luncheon group, or a morning cafe, or a drop-in centre, or whatever. Maybe you're a walking group, or a dog walking group, or whatever, a cycling group. And it's in that context that this resource has been produced. How might you help a group of people who don't go to church begin to explore Christian spirituality if they would like to do so? And so if you've had experience of that, of doing that sort of thing, if you're in one of those groups, then do share that in the breakout rooms with the other people you're with. It doesn't matter if you've got no experience of that, that's fine. How did you react to this resource anyway? Was it helpful? What was challenging? What you might want to know more about, ask more about? What might you disagree with? And then we can have a discussion in a few minutes.
Great. So I'm going to create those rooms. I think you've either got 2 or 3 people in each room. So briefly introduce yourselves, and you've got 6 or 7 minutes to talk about evangelism and your reactions to the resource. And then we'll come back and you'll be invited to share what you were discussing when we all come back together. So hopefully you've got a thing on the screen now which invites you to join the group, and we'll see you back in about 7 minutes or so.
Great. Well done, Simon. That's good. So
okay, welcome back. I hope you've had some good conversations in your groups. What I suggest you do is to write a couple of those things that you were talking about, things that struck you in the conversation that you've just had. And maybe it's something that you said, maybe it was something that somebody else said, or just some reflections. If you type them into the chat box, and then perhaps we'll come to a couple of you, and you can unmute, and we'll have a chat with you about what you've written. But just for a minute or so, just write down your reflections, or your questions, or your comments that have arisen in your group. Just give us a sense of what you were talking about in your breakout groups. And I realize I'm just going to put the link in the chat box as well, because I think a couple of people have said, "Oh, what's the link?" I put it in the email yesterday, but I'm going to put the link in there so you can. I wouldn't suggest you go and look at it now. But if I put the link there, you can access it later. There you go. So let's just simplicity feels achievable. Yeah, there's some simple organic approach. Seems doable. There's some really good positive feedback there. That's good. Yeah, in Sheila's group, they were talking about the experience of Alpha and the Bible course. We might going to where they already are, not asking them to come to something else. Talked about adding activities onto the outreach activities we already do. Yeah, great, some really good comments. Keep them coming. I don't know, Mike, do you want to sort of tackle 1 or 2 of those sort of thoughts there, or respond to them? Just interesting, sort of comparing. So in Sheila's group, they were talking about the experience of Alpha in the Bible course. Just wondering if you want to sort of reflect, reflect on that.
Yes, I'm just trying to, I couldn't, I was just looking for that particular comment, but I couldn't find it. But it is very different to Alpha, although I think it embraces some of Alpha's principles of being relaxed, laid back, or letting the group kind of set the agenda, leaving lots of space for people to ask questions and so on. I think all that is very much in common with Alpha, and indeed the group approach, and many of the contexts in which this would be used would actually be over meals as well. So all that is shared ground. Where it's different is, and I think one of its advantages is that you don't have to prepare a talk. And the brilliant thing about this is there are different approaches that you can use, with people at different stages of the journey. Alpha, I think, tends to work with people who are at a particular stage of their journey to faith. Here, you can do this. You can use some of this material with people who are hardly even starting out, all the way through to people who are kind of, well advanced on their journey. So that'd be the first thing. And then secondly, instead of a talk, you have these different approaches to studying the Bible in a evangelistic way. And you've got Bible talk, which was in the animation. But again, as I said before, if you read the written resource, there are about 3 or 4 other different approaches which may be helpful. And so if I was using this, and if, for example, I had a cafe context, I might, and I decided to use Bible talk, I might just use one of those questions a session. And so, maybe we're all eating together, I don't know. And then maybe it's all age and you're eating together, a meal is part of it, you've had some fun activities and so on. You could then just have sort of 10 minutes in different tables where someone tells a story from the Gospels or reads it, and then asks the tables just to discuss the first question. If the story happened today, what would it look like? And then the next time you meet, you could recap and retell the story, and then ask the second question. What's it saying to you? And then the third time you meet, you could recap again, and then ask the third question, could it make a difference to our lives? And then the fourth time you meet, you go away, do an experiment, come back, did it make a difference to our lives? And you can just give very simple examples of how it might make a difference, help you think about things differently, help you think about a person differently, maybe encourage you to pray or something, just stay in your mind. Go and do an experiment, then come back. Did it make a difference to our lives? So I think where this scores over Alpha, therefore, is, and I'm not trying to say you use one rather than the other, because I think I would use Alpha when people had actually come to faith. I think that would be brilliant then as a sort of Christian basics course to help them go over in pen what they've done in pencil. But I think the brilliant thing about this is, first of all, the fact you don't have to prepare a talk means that it's really time efficient. So I know quite a lot of Fresh Expressions where they do little epilogues or do little talks. You've got a craft group, I've got to do a little 5-minute spot. You don't need to do that with this. You can use some of the material here, either a Bible study discussion or actually conversations with a difference. So that's so it saves time, but secondly, it's very, very flexible. And I know someone actually in America, and he's got a walking group, and their group gathers together, and then he reads them one of these gospel stories, and then he just asks one of those 4 questions, and then they go walking, answering those questions. What's the story saying to you? Come on, off we go for the walk, and they talk about it as they walk. So it's incredibly flexible. So I think that's also where it scores.
Brilliant, thank you, Mike.
And it's experience-based, and all the time it's asking people, particularly in these discussion, Bible discussion options, it's asking people to reflect on their experience. And there are no right and wrong answers. It's all very easy for people to join in. And the brilliant thing for Christians is they don't have to get all screwed up about, how am I going to give my testimony? How am I going to talk about the Christian faith? The Bible does the evangelism. All you have to do is to just join in and say, well, what's it saying to me at the moment?
Yeah, Great. Mike, I'm just looking at some of the other comments, and both Johanna, who's mentioned about an existing group and thinking about inviting people afterwards. I don't know, Johanna, if you want to say anything else about that. And I think, Sheila, you talked about the possibility of using it with a food bank in a food bank context. I don't know if you've got thinking about an existing group and how that might develop into this. Do you want to say anything else about that? And then perhaps Mike can talk to us a bit about what that might look like.
Yeah, I think my thoughts were, I've got fairly new groups, and it's just always that balance of how do you want to have a faith element to it, but the group isn't explicitly a faith group, but then how do you introduce it in a way that's I guess, yeah, not off-putting to people, and I like the idea of, well, if you'd like to stay at the end, or inviting people to be part of something, and hopefully if people enjoy it, they'll come back, have conversations within the wider group, and hopefully there'll be a bit of a ripple spread of kind of come along, and they'll maybe encourage others to come along. But I like just the idea of just giving that invite. Yeah.
You got any thoughts on that, Mike, or should we hear from Sheila? Do you want to just talk about the food bank context as well? And then
let Sheila talk first. That'd be great. Yeah, love to hear about that. It sounds really interesting.
Oh, you're muted, Sheila.
The story of our life.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Basically, with the food bank clients, we have some tables out, and they're able to have coffee, tea, biscuits, sometimes toasted tea cakes and things with us. And we sit and have a chat with them. And it's a chance for them to offload any worries or concerns. And if there's anything we can help them with, put them in touch with other facilities, etc. And we had a sermon, and it was on bridging the gap. And this was obviously the gap between us and God, and Jesus bridging that gap. But then I saw us in that position with the food bank clients, bridging the gap between us and their needs. And I thought I could talk about that with them, this bridging the gap. And I thought, it could easily come into the conversation with them, and it might sort of spread out from there, the conversation.
That's great.
About
Thanks,
bridging this gap.
So I think those are brilliant. Both those examples are really brilliant. I think if I take the first one, I can imagine introducing at the end of a session, absolutely, and then it's entirely voluntary, and people will stay behind or not, just as they like, and doing the sort of thing in that first animation. And I think the written guide would have some sort of insights, if I remember, about how to do it in a sensitive way and so on. I know of one cafe which, instead of doing this after the cafe meets, has a sort of separate zone in the room. So I guess it must be quite a large room. And then at a particular time in the morning, people can gather in a corner and they light a candle and do it as part of the main event. Again, totally voluntary. So depending on the layout, that may or may not work, but that would be a possibility. I think in terms of the food bank, I'm trying to visualize the situation. I think, Sheila, doing what you're suggesting and doing a little talk, that could be fine. And that's great. And the brilliant thing about that is you only have to do it as a one-off. And then you might do some of these other conversational themes. You could do that, conversations with a difference. And I love the idea of conversations with a difference. You just let people choose a topic choose any topic you want. The only rule is it's got to be of interest to everyone in the group. And you could do that, different topics at different tables. And then halfway through, or 2/3 of the way through, you just say, these are conversations with a difference. If you'd like to, just imagine that God, or if he exists, or a spiritual guru drops in, what would they say about the topic? So, you know, and you could, that works with any topic. I mean, during lockdown, a dog walking group, they all met by Zoom and they waved their dog's paws at each other and they all talked about pet care and all the rest. And then towards the end, the convener of the group said, just tell me, if God had a dog, what type of dog would it be? And they all laughed and then talked about that. So you can sort of tailor make these conversations with a difference the way it work, where you like. One youth worker said to me, this is really easy for my group of teenagers. I'll just put 2 tables out in the middle of the room. On one table, I'll put a bit of paper with Love Island written on it. On another table, I'll put the name of a celebrity. They can all sit round, talk about the celebrity, talk about the latest Love Island show. And then, you know, halfway through, I'll say, you know, if a spiritual guru dropped in or a God, you know, dropped in, what would they say about it? You know, and you only have to do this for 5 or 10 minutes. For teenagers, that may be all the length of time they need. That's long enough. But what you've done is to begin to introduce spirituality there. Later on, then you might start, yeah, let's either have that conversation, or would you like to hear a Bible story? And let's talk about that using the questions that are there in discussing. So I think, you know, you could, in either of those settings, you could find ways that work, you know, for people. And it's a question of just what works for the group.
That's great. Happy to open it up for other sort of comments and questions based on what we've heard so far, based on what we've seen in the video. Any, if no one unmutes, I'm going to perhaps pick on Keith and Vanessa. I'm going to the comment that you put in the chat box. You said it sounds easy, but is it really? I just wonder where if you want to say anything about that, because yeah, I wonder where your question about whether it's really as easy as it sounds is coming from.
Well, I think we both find it quite hard to talk to other people anyway, let alone about Jesus. And it has struck me that you need to be the person, to a certain extent, who's running these groups to be able to introduce all these things. I mean, we're in a walking group, but people are sort of very scattered, and I can't imagine them, you know, we sit in different clumps according to whether we like the sun or the shade and such things when we stop for coffee and lunch. And I can't imagine people being happy to sort of stop afterwards at the end and get together, or beforehand to talk about things. One can, yes, sometimes sort of chat a bit to an odd individual, but then one's ways sort of part and one doesn't really get into any deep conversations. I mean, I love the video, I love the things, and I thought this does sound great, but I'm not sure. I mean, I have thought, well, we should start sort of some kind of group, but we're a very small village. There are so many things around happening already, run by non-Christians. One can sort of infiltrate, perhaps, at some of them and try and, I mean, there is a so-called friendly cafe once a fortnight where people are sitting in tables. So perhaps one could somehow lead the conversation, but that's lots of elderly deaf people who can't necessarily hear unless one sort of yells out loud. So advice, please.
Mike?
So, wow, and others in the group here may have sort of wisdom, I'm sure you would. I think, you know, if we start with that walking group, I'm not sure if the walking group stops at all and has a drink in a pub or lunch together. If it does, then that could, depending on the group, be a possible opportunity, because you could, as an experiment, say to folks, do they want to sort of nominate a topic that we can talk about in the pub and see what happens and see if that works. But it all depends. You're absolutely right. It depends on the people in the group and the context and how it all works. And it might be that that working group is not the appropriate context in which to do this. But I do think that in a village context, if you're part of these different groups and you know people, there's nothing to stop you just starting another group and calling a soul group or a spiritual well-being group or spiritual wholeness group, whatever language is right. And then just say, you know, we're going to hold this either in your sitting room or in a community hall or whatever. And if 3 or 4 people turn up, that's great. You know, in a village, 3 or 4 people is, wow, that's the size of many church congregations.
Yeah.
You know, and I keep
pretty much ours.
You know, it's you know, Jesus is not interested primarily in the numbers. You know, he says, you know, whether it's 2 or 3 are gathered, he's there with them. So you could just get 2 or 3 people who want to explore spirituality, and you know, and when they gather, they say, well, how are we going to do this? And you might just say, well, Jesus is known as the world's greatest spiritual teacher. Let's look at some of the stories he told and see what we think of them. And then away you go.
Great. That sounds good. Thank you.
Great.
And I think the way that these activities are discussion based, rather than us sort of having something prepared that people have to sit and listen to, it's much more discussion based. And I think that's what makes it attractive. People often don't like being talked at, but they do like to engage in conversations about these spiritual matters, and I think that's helpful. There was a question, Mike, how much success have you had with this? And I think my first response would be to look at some of the videos, the selfie videos that are part of the resource, where people are talking about their experience of using these resources. And I think I would also say we're inviting people who are using the resource to come back to these workshops and share, you know, what's worked, what's not worked. So take it away, try it, and then do let us know how things are going and what the outcomes are. But Mike, have you got anything that you'd want to say to how much success have you had with this approach?
I mean, I was in Florida quite recently, and someone said that they've been using Bible Talk with young adults for 3 or 4 years. You know, I talked about it just before the lockdown, and they were using it. The conversation, the story that I gave you about the dog group and during the lockdown, that came out of the idea of conversations with a difference. The people involved, they just took the idea and adapted it to that particular group. So those are just 2 examples that straight away come to mind.
Yeah, that's great. Christine's just pointing out that a lot of conversations about the Queen at the moment and her faith, and sort of there's a connection in that conversation about the Queen and the funeral, and what her faith meant to her. So that's definitely something that's topical, that would help open up conversations with a difference, perhaps. Are there other sort of questions or comments or thoughts on evangelism and this resource that people want to ask while we're together? Oh, we're coming, it's about 10 to 2, so we'll almost an hour, so we'll draw to a close soon. But before we do, just want to give people a chance to ask something else, if anyone's got a comment or a question. I'm not seeing any hands waving or any final thoughts, Mike, and then I'll pray for us, and we can go our separate ways. But just any sort of closing thoughts before we go?
I think you can do this with any group you want. I mean, we've just in our neighborhood, we've got there are 8 of us that have just begun to meet, and we're looking at four of us go to church, four of us don't. We're looking at pieces of religious art, and we're just talking about them, and we're going to see what happens. Just find any theme, anything that will introduce spiritual types of conversation. And we eat together. And I was very struck that the guy who said grace when we ate, I just noticed that the way he did it was, he just started just straight away by just want to be thankful for this opportunity to meet together. So he didn't even address God, let alone Jesus Christ. He said, let's just be thankful for this time to meet together and to eat together. And I thought, yeah, what a great way of starting this off, so that it's prayerful, but it doesn't make any commitments and assumptions that people believe in God. It's just very open. As the group goes on meeting, we get to know each other, and one can see what language is going to be appropriate. So I would just say that, you can get these groups together in any context, and among our neighbors, people were just really excited. I didn't think it was a particularly brilliant discussion, but they all really wanted to meet next time. Because I think people want opportunities to talk together, and they get a little bit bored with the conversations that always stay at the superficial. Sometimes they do want to talk something substantially. So you could do a book club with a difference, because it has a spiritual dimension to it. We're going to discuss our books from a spiritual angle. You could do a film club. We'll watch a video one evening, and then the next week we'll eat, have a meal, and discuss it from a spiritual and ethical standpoint. So you can get these little groups together. Very easy to do. If you like particular genre of music, you can do the same sort of thing. So I'd just encourage you to if you haven't already got a group, to form a group around your own particular interest, and to connect it. Let me give you one last example. I've got a friend, he's a classic car enthusiast, and he gathers these classic car enthusiasts together. In the summer, they all go to a garage and they look at each other's cars. I can think of nothing more boring, but they all love it. And then in the winter, which is even more boring, they go and watch films and videos about classic cars. I mean, this for me would be dire, but they all love it. You see, now you might say, well, how can you connect spirituality to classic cars? So he's writing little devotions around, say, the theme of rust. And what about rust, and what happens in our lives when they get rusty? And so he invited his folks to bring a part of their car that they thought was really beautifully and wonderfully made, which is a sort of adaptation from a verse in the Psalms, and got them to talk about it. So you see, just get your interest, get people around it, and then say, this is with a difference. And you just bring that little spiritual dimension into it in whatever way you feel is comfortable for you in the group. So, if you've got a group, great. If you haven't got a group, go and form one with a friend. Find a friend. Don't do it on your own because it's terrible. But, it's so lonely. But do it with a friend and see what happens.
Brilliant, Mike. Thank you. You reminded me of a friend of mine who loves knitting, who says about Jesus that he's given her a pattern for life. And that's her conversation starter in this knitting group.
Very good.
Yeah. And so, do have a look at the Sharing Jesus resource, and do try it. And we'd really love to have your feedback. Come back to another workshop or email us. You can contact us through the website, and we look forward to hearing from you. Let me pray for you as we go our separate ways today. And Lord, I want to thank you for everybody here. Thank you that they've made the time to think about and to explore together what it means to share you, to invite others to know you, to help others to encounter you. We thank you for the prompting of your Spirit this lunchtime as we've reflected together and we've thought about possibilities and ideas. And I pray that as we go from this space, you might lay one or two actions on our hearts, that we might be obedient to your prompting and put those things into practice. Lord, we pray for your empowering in that, and we pray for you to go before us by your Spirit, that we might follow where you lead, and in that give you glory. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And thank you again everyone for coming. Lovely seeing you all. Thank you for your comments.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
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 Bye.